Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the RDA, the Board of Directors of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City. Today is September 12th, and our meetings are public, and you are welcome to join us in person, on Zoom, or by watching from the City Council agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you will continue to join us in whichever manner you feel more comfortable. We begin our meeting with comments to the board. I would like to remind you that written comments might be submitted to the RDA offices via mail to P.O. Box 145476 SLC, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or by emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com. You can also call our 24-hour line and leave a message, 801-535-7654. Thank you for joining us today. And before we start, I want to remind everyone that our rules of decorum, which are in place to ensure our meetings move along well and to help everyone feel comfortable sharing their comments. A copy of the full rules of decorum are available at the door, and our staff will post those rules in our Zoom link. If you would like to make a comment today, we're accepting comments in person and online on Zoom. Scott Corpany from our staff will moderate our Zoom. I will message you with any questions about your registration. Staff is handling a lot of tasks, so please limit your messages to technical issues and minimal information updates. If you need to speak with our staff, please select Scott Corpany from the list of participants. If you need to, you can also raise your hand using the Zoom tool to indicate that you need something from the host. Taylor Hill and our staff will be calling those who wish to comment based on the order we receive those names. If you're on Zoom, please unmute your mic when Taylor calls your name. We will now open our general comment period. Taylor, please start with our first comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like there is no one registered to speak.
Is anybody here present that wants to address the RDA board? Okay, so we're going to be moving on to item C1, since there is no public hearings today, and that's a redevelopment agency business, the RDA board of directors, the approval of minutes to start. I need a motion on that.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the meeting minutes of June 6, 2023, June 13th, 2023, and August 15th, 2023.
Second.
A motion by board member Dugan and a second by board member Valdemoros. Any discussion on that? I'm going to call the question. All of those say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously with all the presents voting aye. Now we're moving to item C2, informational station center vision and implementation plan progress update. At the table will be Danny Waltz, the RDA director, Ashley Ogden, senior project manager Mark Asnis from Perkins and Will. It seems like that's it for now. Okay, you can take it on now.
My pen, Mr. Chair. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. This item is for the Station Center Vision and Implementation Plan. You will recall that the board provided funding, and back in February of 2023, we engaged a consultant team consisting of Perkins and Will, HR&A advisors, Kimley Horn, and Phil Merrick, a placemaking expert, to look at the design and redevelopment strategy for the agency's approximate 15 acres within the Depot District area. Today's item is a progress report on that, to provide an opportunity for the board to be updated on where we're at in that process, as well as provide input and answer any questions you may have. The schedule for completion of this study is looking at towards the end of the year, which we will then use that to help inform us in terms of property disposition, advertising it, and what we'd like to see within the station center development. So I will start by looking awkwardly at Ashley Ogden to see if she wants to add anything to that, and then we'll turn it over to Mark and the consultant team. And we also have Imran online who will jump in as part of the presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Mark Asness. I am with Perkins & Will. I am the project manager for the consultant team. I just want to thank you all for inviting me today to provide you with an update on the Station Center vision and implementation plan. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to start by providing you with a very high-level overview of our design framework, and this is very much in progress. And then my colleague Imran Akhil from HR&A Advisors will provide preliminary recommendations for governance. And then, of course, we are more than happy to answer any questions you may have and are very much looking forward to receiving your feedback and your guidance as we continue to move this project forward. Next slide, please. So I like to start with the vision plan, the vision statement. Thank you, Ashley, because I'm actually going to read it. So Station Center places community wellness at the heart of its design framework. The neon glow of the Rio Grande sign shining atop the historic depot is a beacon welcoming all Utahns to be a part of a robust new downtown neighborhood located at Utah's most transit-rich gateway. And for us, that's always been our North Star as we've really begun to dive into how to really calibrate this design framework and think about a truly unique, sustainable, inclusive new neighborhood. So if you go to the next slide. This vision statement has also very much been informed by extensive community stakeholder engagement. And we have spoken to and have received feedback from a very diverse range of different people, from educational partners, industry anchors, incubator organizations, city and government entities, elected officials, civic and cultural organizations, neighborhood associations, and many, many more. And what you're seeing on the screen here is photos from our May 2023 stakeholder meeting, where we all collectively came together and really started to envision what the future of Station Center could be like, you know, placing where the streets should be, the parks, the plazas, thinking about land use and programming. How tall should the buildings be? What are these important community linkages that we really need to be thinking about? It was an absolute blast. And I will say that we are having our next community stakeholder meeting tomorrow morning, where we'll be talking about a lot of the material that you are seeing today. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this is where we're at in terms of our design framework. And again, we're moving forward with an aspirational, visionary, yet implementable design framework that's really very much informed by the voices that we've heard throughout this planning process. And what I'll say is that this is very much still in progress. This is a snapshot of where we are at. We had to put our pencils down at some point to get ready for this meeting, and this is at with this drawing. But I think one of the key takeaways here is this opportunity for transformation, to really think about a truly unique, inclusive, sustainable new downtown neighborhood. And if you go to the next slide, please. This design framework is really consisting of I'm going to hold my sentence there.
We need the next slide.
Thank you. This framework really consists of critical layers that really establishes what could an optimal Salt Lake City community wellness district look like. And we're going to walk through each of these different categories. I'm going to start with regenerative public realm, and we're going to build up. So for the next slide here, we are going to start with our regenerative public realm. And one of the most foundational and important parts of really thinking about how we are really thinking about the design framework here is establishing compact blocks. How are we breaking up the typical Salt Lake City block to really first and foremost think about how can we create a new walkable neighborhood, but also ensuring that we have compact urban development parcels for when new development comes online. And if you go to the next slide, so that essentially starts to really determine where are our streets, where are our parks, our plazas, where are the spaces in between our buildings, our public realm. And for us, we wanted to go beyond what is just a sustainable public realm. We wanted to think about it from a regenerative standpoint. How can we heal the site? How can we restore it for all living things? And for us, we've started to really integrate concepts around biodiversity and habitat, tree canopy and urban forestry, water conservation for outdoor irrigation, native planting and xeriscaping, And of course, thinking about community spaces for people of all ages and abilities and all walks of life. So if you go to the next slide. So overlaying that public realm with an sustainable mobility network. So if you look at that diagram that's in the circle here, it's our inverted mobility pyramid. And so generally what you would see is you'd see cars at the very top of a pyramid, and we're flipping it. So now we're thinking about people first streets and really putting walking and rolling at the very top. And as you can see, denoting in purple where our priority pedestrian streets are. Thinking about cycling, how can we create city bikeways that are safe and low stress for the 8 to 80 range, all ages and abilities. And of course, it's absolutely critical to think about our active transportation framework in creating seamless connections to high capacity transit at Salt Lake Central Station. So if you go to the next slide. One of the most critical parts of our mobility network is championing the Green Loop. And we are really excited by the Green Loop concept coming through Station Center site. And the way we've approached it is really two different scales. We've zoomed out to really think about how is Station Center contributing to this larger downtown urban design big move, how it's a part of a much larger type of linear park concept, but also really thinking about the extents of the Green Loop within Fifth West and within our site. And how can we reconfigure and really redesign this to become a new community amenity. So in the next slide, it's more than just thinking about how this urban trail or this multi-use path is moving through the Fifth West. It's also about really programming everyday community life and thinking about how this space is going to be activated and welcoming and inclusive different times of day and night and different times of the year, thinking about opportunities for a playground, for retail spaces for micro enterprises. It's 2023, so we have to do the prerequisite pickleball courts here. Again, it's that opportunity to really think about how can this be an amazing community amenity for all different types of users. So if you go to the next slide, please. And complementing the Green Loop and Fifth West is really thinking about 300 South. And this idea of this festival street, it's really been a part of Station Center visioning since the very beginning of this project. And we've really held on to it, and we think it's an amazing opportunity to really create this transit gateway entry from Salt Lake Central into the city, really inviting people to come into the neighborhood, see the magnificent Rio Grande Depot, and really move into downtown. And for us, a festival street is by definition a flexible street. We want to design it so that it can accommodate everyday urban life, but also be flexible enough to accommodate events like outdoor movies, concert events, farmers market, things of that nature. So if you go to the next slide, please. We are leading with people first streets, and that's very important, but I think it's also important to note that we have really thought long and hard about how our mobility network is a functional roadway, how it's going to provide vehicular access throughout. It's going to integrate into the larger city transportation network. It's going to provide opportunities for on-street, off-street parking, for pickup and drop-off for rideshare. We've also denoted areas for loading and servicing for new private development. So really thinking about this from a functional standpoint. Go to the next slide, please. And, Danny and Ashley have really emboldened us to think about how can we lead with shared parking? And how can we think about this in 4 different kind of big key takeaways here. One is progressive TOD parking ratios for new developments. So thinking really strategically about parking minimums, if any, and parking maximums and where we're going to cap it. Thinking about with our partners, Kimley Horn, who are our transportation planners and engineers, about what could a 50% reduction target in conventional parking supply look like with transportation demand management strategies put into place. When we do build new parking, that it would be shared and unbundled and be used by all different users within the district. And then if you go to that diagram on the right in the circle, we wanted to zoom out and think about the larger depot district And how could we proffer an idea of partnering with the Gateway and with UTA to really maximize parking supply and really think about efficiencies for both existing parking and any planned parking that would come into the district. That dashed blue line there is a circulator that could be put forward that would be able to efficiently and frequently move parking patrons throughout the district. So if you go to the next slide, please. So now moving into arts and culture, one of the things that has been the most inspiring about Station Center is art space. Their tenants, their creative agencies, their nonprofits, the fact that they have been such an amazing anchor for the neighborhood for so many years, we really wanted to celebrate that. And we wanted to think about how can we expand beyond the extents of just the art space buildings at Station Center and really think about a larger arts campus. So is there an opportunity to really think in the interior of the neighborhood for temporal art installations, for opportunities for flexible venue space for the DIY festival, for the urban flea market, for Brewstillery, among other types of events? And then how can new development that is fronting along this arts campus, how can we require for small-scale maker spaces, for micro-enterprises of artists, artisans, makers, and incubators to really help to strengthen that character of this arts campus? If you go to the next slide, please. And so this is just some examples. Could it be a temporal canvas for local artists and artisans? You know, really become this really funky, amazing destination where people from all over the city want to check out what's happening here. But also could it be a venue for a lot of the events that we've heard from our stakeholder groups that they need permanent venue space for? So if you go to the next slide, please. And arts and culture is really part of a larger story around strengthening social fabric. You know, for us, we have this aspiration to really think about a resilient and truly equitable district, and what does that mean? And what we want to put forward is recommendations and ideas around affordable housing, affordable commercial spaces, partnering with the state of Utah, specifically their Department for Cultural and Community Engagement, opportunities for physical and programmatic connections to West Side neighborhoods, opportunities for access to healthy food options and health clinics, opportunities to have apprenticeships and workforce development, and really looking to allow for historically marginalized and underrepresented communities to really be the recipients of this investment in this new neighborhood. So if you go to the next slide, please. And really, that's going to bring a lot of amazing vibrancy in downtown life. It's really going to make our street life be something really special. But I'll also note that we've also been thinking about traditional type of retail uses and where it should be concentrated, specifically around the Festival Street and the Green Loop, opportunities for storefronts, shops, local shops, restaurants, really creating this local food scene that could really spill out onto this amazing new public realm. If you go to the next slide, please. So now we're moving into the vertical component of the design framework. And one of the statements that we put forward as part of this planning process since the very beginning is that Station Center is the best transit-oriented development site in the state of Utah. And for us, that really means maximizing the development potential here. And so for us, what you'll see is really creating downtown allowable building heights. And I will note that this exceeds the allowable heights that are currently in the Gateway mixed-use zoning district. But, and again, we would love your guidance and your feedback on this. We do, with the vision we're putting forward and the intention for real value capture, we do see that it would be warranted and appropriate to really maximize the type of development that could happen here. So if you go to the next slide, please. And with that maximum allowable building height comes this opportunity for a really calibrated mixture of uses. So as you see on that legend to the right, it's opportunity for residential development for all different price points, all ages and abilities, commercial spaces to really advance Tech Lake City, life science, cultural and civic, hospitality, active uses on the ground floor, and our central parking garage that's fronting along 4th South Frontage Road. So if you go to the next slide, please. So now just wrapping up with sustainable building design, it's really a three-prong approach. The first is fostering biophilic neighborhoods. You know, we have this really amazing natural regenerative public realm. We want our design standards and guidelines to really ensure that there's a direct connection for occupant wellness and really a connection to nature, but also thinking about embodied carbon and how can we be strategic about infusing new life in some of the existing structures that are in the neighborhood today to really think about it from an embodied carbon standpoint. Go to the next slide, please. And then conserving and celebrating water, absolutely critical for Utah, absolutely critical for anywhere, to be honest. But we're putting forward specific strategies. One is thinking about conveying and collecting stormwater and potentially piping it into an underground water basin that could help with irrigation for the Green Loop and other landscaped areas. Thinking about permeable surfaces wherever possible. Opportunities to really advocate and incentivize gray water systems so we could have recycled water supply and really take advantage of non-potable water use. And then finally, the next slide. Harnessing solar power. So a part of this is very kind of typical urban design strategies, really thinking about maximizing the optimal solar orientation to help create high performance buildings, letting in southern light in the winter months to reduce energy use, and also being really strategic about how we sculpt the urban form to cast shadows for comfortable microclimates, but also being, again, very visionary and aspirational and thinking, could this neighborhood be 100% electric district? Could we be thinking about on-site and off-site renewable energy sources here? And then finally, this opportunity with our transportation, our building materials, our high-performance buildings, our utilities, to really put forward an aspirational target of no net new particulates, to really ensure that we're actively cleaning the air. So my final slide, if you go to the next slide, please, is really coming back to that vision development framework. And again, I just want to thank you all for hearing this progress report. And I will pass it on to my colleague Imran to talk about governance.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. My name is Imran Afel. I'm a principal at HRNA. If you go to the next slide, I'm turning on my camera, so I think hopefully you can see me. With the mission-driven approach of the RDA, governance is important to the successful delivery of this very exciting project. Governance provides clarity of leadership, decision-making, and resource alignment that allows a project like this to materialize and accomplish all of the goals that the RDA and its partners have set forward. Next slide, please. A leadership framework and alignment of resources are the first two steps in governance at Station Center. And as you'll see in subsequent slides, there are specific outcomes when these two components of governance come together in the context of a project like Station Center. Next. First and foremost, these two come together and the governing entity is responsible for the vision of the project. Whether it's establishing a hub for pickleball, as I think Mark said earlier, or other activities that the RDA and its partners believe are important for the city and for this part of the city in particular, governance allows that vision to materialize with clear accountability. Governance also provides a clear hierarchy to settle conflicts and allow for efficiency in vision implementation. And then governance is critical in leveraging and partnering with the local ecosystem, whether it's innovators or developers or other partners, to make projects like this successful. Next slide. A good governance structure will activate Station Center, catalyzing transformation towards a welcoming experience and bringing people to the site. The way that happens is that governance can attract users to the site. It can activate empty spaces with new uses, attract end users and customers, and bring all of these people to the site in a way that is attractive to businesses and other partners. Of course, governance can attract target tenants. It can do so by supporting the attraction of these target tenants by providing resources and by providing mechanisms for these target tenants to come to and be a part of this vision and this project. Governance can help test new concepts to inform a future mix of amenities, whether that's new food options or other retail amenities, new programming and events, and so on. Governance can help with brand management by creating positive perceptions for customers, tenants, and public agencies, and signaling an opportunity and excitement to the public. And governance can support entitlements by providing direction to support the entitlement narrative and show investors that there is, in fact, a value and a real opportunity at the site. Next slide. Governance has been successfully implemented in many places across the country. Successful urban districts have this robust governance structure to support activation and to build a thriving and inclusive environment. A couple of examples of that include the Del Mar Loop in St. Louis, where the primary goal was to bring retail tenants and activate an area that was adjacent to or close to some of the institutions in St. Louis. Another St. Louis example is Cortex. In this case, governance brought together a number of stakeholders in the life science industry and created a dynamic and kind of iconic cluster of research activity that is still today one of the gold standards of a great innovation district project. Tech Square in Atlanta, that is the combination of Georgia Tech, but also a number of other stakeholders, allowed that district to materialize and become a vibrant urban center. And then the Lawn on D in Boston, which is a really interesting space. It's an open outdoor area next to Boston's large conference center. Governance allowed that site to become activated. It was once completely vacant and was vastly underutilized, but governance allowed programming and activation to bring people to the site and to bring new energy and momentum to this part of the city. Next slide. So governance can position Station Center as a state-of-the-art urban district that exemplifies the values and culture of Salt Lake City. Next. We contemplate that governance requires building capacity, and that process will likely take 3 phases: pre-startup, which we expect will be about 1 to 2 years, startup, which will be another 1 to 2 years, and then stabilization, which occurs in year 5 and beyond. And during this, these 3 steps, on the next slide, in the pre-startup phase, staffing for Station Center is supported by external neutral third-party services, offering embedded management to support the RDA and its gaps and needs. And that can include providing support to move the development forward, to support activation, to support anything related to helping this project materialize. In the startup phase, Station Center staffing begins to transition from external embedded management to include more permanent local staff employed by Station Center itself that is responsible for continuing the activation, continuing to support the development and all of the things we've already mentioned. And then in stabilization, as that project continues to mature, the staffing transition should near completion with Station Center dedicated with local employees who are focused on accomplishing all of the things we mentioned, supporting development, supporting activation, helping the district be a vibrant and successful place. Next slide. Now, going back to the image that Mark shared previously, we wanted to look at examples of what governance could do for the vision that's been put forward. Governance here can facilitate arts programming, for example, in coordination with some of the local arts agencies you have in Salt Lake City. It can help activate and manage open spaces. Mark mentioned a number of great open spaces that are essential to the framework of this site. Those spaces need to be activated and managed well so they are attractive to users. Governance can contract for local food programming, whether that's existing organizations in the city or new organizations who want to come to the city and help build up the food scene in and around Station Center. Governance can help facilitate a district parking strategy. Mark touched on parking earlier, but a district parking strategy requires a lot of collaboration and planning, and governance can help lead all of those things. Governance can help attract ground level retail tenants, and then being next to all of the transit activity here in Station Center, governance can coordinate with transit agencies to ensure that the project and the development work well with the transit offerings and make the most of this extraordinary transit-oriented development site. Next slide. Back to you, Mark.
Yes, so this is our final slide, and we wanted to bring it back to the design vision. And yes, thank you very much again for your time.
Board members, any comments, questions?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate the vision. I appreciate the vision of the Rio Grande sign being the historic beacon of it, and I always want to make sure that we keep that place alive and well, because it is such a beautiful place, and we'll have to see how this works in with my 5th South, 5th West train box, because I think it'd be great for that. On the plan here, the two things I had just some questions about. The first was the 400-foot building just west of Rio Grande, and I think it seems like it's an interesting place to put the tallest building, like overshadowing the beacon that we wanted to use with the Rio Grande. And then the second is, using the word overshadowing, it would also create a big shadow over the Rio Grande if it seems like it's a little bit north of the Rio Grande. So in the wintertime, when light is a premium, it would be shadowing the Rio Grande also from as the sun is setting in the west. I can understand the desires to make the area a little bit more cooler in the summer times, but just that location so close to the Rio Grande, how that would be kind of like it kind of blocks your view of that vision. So just a design thought on that side. And the other side was looks like you had the station center moving north from where it's currently located up towards 300 South, because it's a little bit further south. Maybe I'm missing that. How the station center, the train station, right? It seemed like you have it moved because it now would be just down 300 South. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Are you referring to the intermodal hub?
The mobile hub, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if the graphics, they may represent the
Maybe,
future UTA's redevelopment.
I don't think it's necessarily being specific that we're moving where the station is. I think it's really in deference to the concurrent planning work that's being done by UTA at Salt Lake Central Station and their Central Station planning effort. For us, we want to be working in synergy with it. So that would be flexible for us to really understand what they're planning.
Sorry, Councilmember Dugan, we
Sorry.
can't hear you.
There you go. So then we could allow people to move east and west a lot easier without the train tracks to move there. And then I have a governance question, but I'll stop there.
Board members? Member Warden? Board member? Board.
Thanks. I love the Festival Street and the one of the pictures that's included and like kind of large scale art installations. So is there an art budget for this, like beyond what we would do for like our 1.5%? Or I'm just asking because it's going to be a festival street. It seems like it might be appropriate to have more for art than we would for a typical project.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that we could look into where we could pull funding for something like that for more public art, but every individual development site, the project, it's RDA policy, the 1.5% for art. They can either put that on site themselves or just contribute to the RDA's art fund. But also, I think the Intermodal Hub is our next HTRZ application. We're also looking at, we'd like to ground lease all of these sites, which kind of creates this ongoing revenue source that the board could potentially put towards art.
I would like to look at, for this site in particular, going above and beyond the 1.5% that we do. I think it's like art, I mean, public art's always important, but I think if we're going to have a festival street and we're going to have an atmosphere that is conducive to some of the pictures and some of our visions for the area, that I think we have to make a bigger investment in art.
Board Member Valdemoros.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A lot of good stuff in here. Sometimes I wonder how much say we can have as a city or as board members about, let me go back. I don't feel like Station Center is a place that nobody wants to go to. I feel like everybody wants to go here, like all developers, all business. I think there's momentum in Salt Lake City, so I guess we have more of a position or a role to kind of dictate what we want to see there, in a way, because we know that everybody wants. So it won't be hard to market, if you will. I do feel like perhaps we could be a little bit more explicit on what we would like to see, at least me. Everything that I've seen is great, but I feel like I want an extra oomph, like an extra, because I feel like it's a way, as we develop these properties, we need to think about making this area of downtown, like almost like the last piece of downtown, a destination area in the county. So as we see suburbs grow and other cities offer a lot of options for families and other activities that perhaps we don't have, I feel like we need to look at what other cities are offering that we can compete with, so that we can recapture those folks that are not coming downtown. As we, council members, have made policies on bringing, family-size housing and affordable home ownership, like bringing a bunch of people to live and work in downtown Salt Lake City. So some of those parks and some of those things that you've shown are really good. I just want something, the place to be in downtown Salt Lake City would be this for everyone, whether it be the coolest playground, whatever. I know some of your staff members here, or some of the younger families that have children in District 4, talk about, where do we take our 2 or 3, 4-year-olds? Like, we always have to go somewhere else, whether it be Liberty Park, whether it be Pioneer Park, but there's nothing like here. So something like that is the feedback that I'm hearing from the constituency. We need a little bit more. So I think this one lends itself for an opportunity like that. If we can bring an extra activity, that it is a place for where the families want to be at. Another thing, two things. I also want to be careful when we plan everything to be in the center, because we miss an opportunity from, let's say, 4 South, as you're driving away or coming in, to showcase that something is happening in that neighborhood, that you actually want to go there. So if we just do a parking lot and, in the back of the buildings or whatever, then most people won't realize that there's something cool happening in that area, and we want people to be curious and actually, go towards there to see what's going on. And then the third thing, and I don't know if I missed it, but what about the public market? Has the public market that we always wanted to do, at least the Downtown Alliance wanted to do, is that still happening? Is that still being contemplated, or is this off the table now? Is interested in? I don't know what's happening with that.
Yeah, I could speak to that. I don't think that that's off the table. I think that we have had multiple conversations with Urban Food Connections, and I believe that they're not as certain. They're kind of, I guess, re-strategizing for themselves, but I don't think their first step will be to invest in real estate, but maybe a slow build in that direction. But we definitely, we are held to procurement rules with Station Center and who our tenants can be, but we would love for them to start to activate this space, and with a public market hall in the future, that would be amazing.
And then how far along are we with talking to the state for the Rio Grande building? Are we talking to them about being part of this whole thing? What are they doing with that building that suffered from the earthquake? Do we know?
Yeah, I don't have clarity on exactly what their plan is for their use of that structure. We know that there are certain state departments who office in that space who have a strong desire to remain there. But it sounds like they're committed to making it a more publicly accessible and active space. And I'm not sure if they know exactly what that looks like yet.
Board Member Petro.
Thank you. Okay, I love that we're not leading with cars, but we're also attempting not to penalize people, especially those who find themselves still dependent on cars in an ecosystem where transit is not enough to live off of. So thank you for that. But let's lobby the state so that we can all live off transit, please. I think I heard every word that I want to hear in a proposal. I heard ownership and family size. I heard water conservation. I heard arts. I heard biodiversity. I heard marginalized and underrepresented. And I love all of them. But I've sat in this seat long enough to be cynical about all of them coexisting in a sustainable way. And so I want to believe that this is the one where we crack the code and we get all the things and we do all the things. I would really appreciate, as we move along, understanding where the sustainability comes from. Because especially as we talk about a governance structure as being that which protects this and gets our aims where we're going, that governance structure is going to undertake a really hefty burden, both in terms of funding, staffing, and responsibility. And I don't comprehend it yet. I want to be a believer, but I've had to make too many compromises sitting in this seat already for me to trust that we can do this with good intentions without, and I don't direct the business of the city, but as we're going further into saying yes, giving blessings, allocating funds, resources, increment, economic development incentives. Those are the things that are going to be really, really important to me. And I come from the arts world. So can we please make sure that we give a lot of parameters to the artists and the arts organizations? We can end up with, something that's really welcoming to like vibey artists that alienates other people, or we can end up in a place where we call anything that's not anglicized art folk art and really celebrate everyone else, and everyone's art is art. It's not folk art just because it didn't come from Western Europe, so things like that. Like, I would love to see, especially as we move into the arts, to really be clear about parameters and make sure that it's not just a really cool vibey place to go, but we have direction with it. But I mean, please be the people who kill my cynicism and do all the things. But I'm going to ask every cynical question along the way to make sure that we've checked every box to get it.
Board Member Mano and then Wharton.
Thanks. I actually appreciate Board Member Petro the way that you said that, because I think that's what I was struggling to understand what I was feeling as well, which is great presentation, really interesting design ideas. Would love for all of these things to happen. The getting from A to Z is what I don't quite understand, and I think it may have something to do with the governance structure part of that, but that's also where I'm perhaps the most concerned, because I don't know exactly what that governance structure looks like, how much authority is being delegated away from the board and in turn the constituents, and how all those little pieces come together. Is this one project or is this 500 little projects, right? Like, is it going to come to us for funding for the pickleball courts in year 1 and then the parking structure in year 3? Or is it like one big thing? Is it all wrapped up in the HTRZ application? I'm struggling to understand when each piece happens, which pieces are interdependent on one another, and who's making those decisions. And the one thing that's the most important to me is when we talk about finding space for marginalized or underrepresented business owners or individuals in the community, who's actually making sure that that goal is met, and what does that look like, right? Is it just like how deep does that go? Is there actual home ownership opportunities for people who otherwise don't have home ownership opportunities in our city? Is there business real estate ownership? What does that all look like, and how do we get to there? And I'm not saying that a governing board isn't the answer, but I'm worried about that, and worried about how that would sort of take away the public say in what happens. And I'm trying to think of other situations where we have governing boards, and the ones that come to mind are the Eccles Theater or the Gallivan Center. And I'm not sure that, to me, those are perfect examples, because I'm not sure exactly how to influence anything that happens in those two spaces, even though they are quasi owned by the RDA or the city, or like we partnered on both of those projects. I don't know how, as a board member or council member, I make sure that my constituents' goals are being met with those two spaces. And I worry that it's because there's a second governance structure that I don't sit on that board. I don't sit on either of those boards, and I don't exactly know how to make sure that I have any kind of influence or oversight in that. So I think that governance structure piece is where my main concerns are, but specifically, like, how does this happen and who's making those decisions along the way? And I don't have an answer to that, but I just need more information before I'm like comfortable saying, yeah, go create a new government that takes all of the tax increment for this whole area, plus the county and the school district and everything else, and do whatever you want with it, right? I'm not sure.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Is there, on page 18, where it says like transit supportive retail, and then there's another one next to it that says industry anchor, like, well, is there an opportunity to get any money from like the federal government for Amtrak and doing an Amtrak station? Because right now it's like a double wide trailer, and I wonder if that, like, I don't know what transit supportive retail is, but maybe it's like a nicer station for that. And then I also want to be thoughtful about like Fourth South, because I think that, you know, long time from now, hopefully sooner rather than later, but to close the loop on transit, and if tracks were to come down Fourth South, I just want to be mindful of like that as a future possibility, so that we have things that are fronting Fourth South that would be conducive to that, especially if there's going to be, you know, residential and retail here. I think it makes a lot of sense to plan ahead for that. So that one pickleball court might have to be moved. But
That's under the viaduct, actually.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. And then other than that, I mean, I share the concern. I want to have oversight, and I in my previous votes or feedback on this area, I don't know if we've ever taken a vote yet, but has been concerned about wanting to make sure that Salt Lake City maintains control ultimately over the land use, and but I do want to, you know, move quickly, because I think we've moved, you know, sometimes we can get a little micromanagey, but in, you know, with the best intentions and all that. So I don't know, but I share the concerns that Councilmember Mono and Petro raised.
Quickly on this topic, since we are on it, I also share the concern of, I want more definition about this governance framework and how it works. Really, obviously, and we mentioned this in the past. You know, I don't want us to go too close to where I feel like it might be a privatization of our municipal power, or, you know, in this case, the tax dollars. And that is a concern, and we're also making a very strong stance on this same issue with the state, and we need to be careful on how we thread that needle. I understand that there is, what we're trying to get to this here is this idea of public-private partnership, and this, you know, focus in this area to create this extra synergy. But I want us to make sure that there is one of the words here that made me wonder about this is it reads, governance will give the RDA and partners clear decision-making pathways, which, you know, it sounds a little more directive than you know, it seems like the decision-making is taken away from us. And that is a concern I have. I do love the project as it is right now. I don't share the concern about the shadow that Councilmember Dugan mentioned, but I prefer that we go high as we can go, and use this piece of land in the downtown core and maximize its use personally. And I'm going to stop right there since Councilmember Dugan wanted to talk.
And thank you very much. I think I share the same concerns on the government's agreement, and I appreciate the desire to move a little bit maybe faster than government moves, but sometimes the speed of government moves slowly because we want to make sure something of this nature is done right with all the inputs that we have, and I think we need to be careful in such a large project. And I appreciate also the examples where it worked out really well in different places in St. Louis and in Boston and other places, and it would be nice to know how those governance agreements worked with their elected officials and where that relationship was, and where, I don't want to use the word veto, where was the elected officials' veto power on some type of change that didn't really agree with what we thought was the best vision for the city as a whole. So it's nice that we had examples. What was their relationship before this? How was it working? Is there elected officials on the board of governance? How is that all structured out? And a little bit more deep diving in that whole sense. And I also want to go back to what Councilmember Petro said about the cynicism on some of these developments. And we've seen in other places where, yes, we're going to have solar panels, we're going to have sustainability, we're going to have permeable surfaces, we're going to have light pollution, we're going to have all this stuff, and then the developer says, well, it's solar ready. And I'm like, every roof is solar ready, and it's been solar ready since the birth of a roof. Everything has solar ready, but there's no solar panels on that solar ready roof, so let's put them on there. Oh, we can't do that because the developer's not going to make any money out of it. Well, put profit last. Let's take care of our people, and let's take care of the planet here first. So I liked a little bit more oomph. And when you say sustainability, yeah, we all talk about it, but very few, once we ask them to do it, they really have a lot of good excuses for not being able to do it, because we haven't given us either incentives to do it, or they just don't feel like they should take it out of their profits, because that's not the way they think. And we need to change that mentality. So I applaud the beauty of it, but I want to see that in writing, that it will happen, and it won't be, we will think about it happening. So that's my 2 cents on that thing. And design, yes, we'll talk to architects about light.
We'll do it later.
All right, thank you very much.
Board Member Young.
So I really do appreciate the plan and all the different aspects and elements that are there. I do have a little bit of pause related to how each of these slides overlays with the other. So I'll just give 2 quick examples. So when I'm looking at slide 17 on strengthening the social fabric, I see the identification of a site for a community health clinic. When I go to the next slide, that same space is identified for retail. And again, I appreciate that we're talking about a vertical alignment, but making sure that we're not labeling something as more than one potential use case. Similarly, we have healthy food options identified, which then on the next slide translates to grocery store and maker space. So just, I would like to be clear on, if we are identifying a specific space for a use, that we're not maybe giving it a category on another slide that then could lead to assumptions about what might be available. I just think that there's an opportunity to clean up some of that language, so that if a community member saw this, they'd have absolute clarity on that's the intended purpose.
Thank you. Board Member Petro.
I just wanted to clarify. One thing I didn't say is I'm in full support of height. Go go high. But then the second thing is, this to me feels like a project similar to the Perpetual Housing Fund, which is one of those innovations that we as a city should be undertaking. We should be creating a new template for how we use urban space, for how we imagine quality of life, how we integrate all of these things, maximizing space, maximizing water. But because it's an innovation, in order for us to use the public trust and the public funding, clarity is going to be paramount. Making sure, like what council member or board member Young just said, that we're not inadvertently even like creating a lack of clarity, even if there's not an untruth layered in there. And as we move forward, more information for me in particular will always be better, because I want to innovate alongside you, but I want to make sure every dollar we have has to do the work of two. So if we're going to innovate, be clear about it, and let's have as many variables fixed so that when we're taking a risk, it's on those things that we absolutely cannot fix in this project.
I think we are on time right now. I really appreciate the presentation. It was it's good to see another vision for this site. Hopefully this is it. This site, I think all of us are, when we drive by it, expect something to happen in that area. So thank you so much for the.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Moving now to item C3, informational as well, and is the proposed housing and transit reinvestment zone tax increment reimbursement policy. And at the table will be, again, Danny Wells, the RDA director, and Corinne Piazza, senior project manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have a presentation, if we can pull that up. You thought you broke it. And today, Corinne and I will be playing the role of Kara Lindsley, who submitted the memo. So please judge accordingly. Thank you. So the item today is a continued discussion on what is our HTRZ tax increment policy. HTRZ, again, is the Housing Transit Reinvestment Zone project areas. Specifically, today is meant to be a follow-up on the previous discussion we had with you as a board, and providing additional opportunity for input. You'll recall the last time we presented this, we had both this policy and our normal CRA tax increment policy that we were looking at. That is coming back to you at a later date for conversation, so today we're just talking about the HTRZ. Next slide, please. So just a quick recap on what tax increment is. TI is the incremental amount of property tax revenue over and above what is a starting point, or what is called the base year amount. And this can either be what we do on a project area basis, and that's how we capture our tax increment for a total project area, or it can be property specific, and you can look at doing that for specific developments. So the reimbursement then is a payment of the portion of that increment that we receive from the project to be paid directly to the developer. A couple things to note: this is post-performance, so this is after the project is built and the public benefits are realized. It is not a loan, it is a direct payment to the developer. This is obviously makes it one of our most lucrative tools, and best practices would tell you that we absolutely want to make sure that we use this to incentivize the most impactful development. It's usually warranted by high public benefits or excessive costs that create a significant gap. Next slide, please. So as part of the creation of the legislation for HTRZs, there we go. HTRZs have a more specific goals and requirements than your traditional CRA project areas that are a little bit more broad-based in terms of their goals. HTRZs are meant to be TOD oriented, include affordable housing. They do have a list of other allowable uses, but they are targeted more towards the density around a transit stop and making sure that that includes affordable housing. As such, we wanted a policy that was directly tied to the creation of HTRZ project areas and assisted with the development there. Next slide, please. So the policy that we have proposed establishes, number one, thresholds that obviously require projects to qualify for even applying. First and foremost is they must meet the HDRZ Act criteria. They do have to be based on gap analysis, which we perform as staff, and they also have to conform with the RDA sustainability and art policies. In addition to that, they have to include activated ground floor space. For a housing project within an HDRZ area and seeking a reimbursement, the HDRZ Act only requires that 10% of the units come in at 8% AMI. We obviously, as an agency and a city, have more aggressive affordable housing goals. So within this policy, we have proposed a higher amount of 20% at 80% AMI or 10% of the units at 60% AMI. And then for non-housing projects, the threshold criteria is that you must meet obviously those first 4 criteria and then at least 2 of the RDA's qualifying livability benchmarks. Next slide, please. And this is just providing a little bit more detail of all the options we have in our benchmarks, which ones are specific to this policy that could be met. Next slide, please. So if you meet the threshold requirement, that essentially provides up to 60% of tax increment received by the RDA for the project. The reimbursement agreement can receive additional increases of 10% in increment if they meet additional criteria. And for housing, that means either an increased level of affordability, that it incorporates family housing, or that it meets an RDA annual housing funding priority, which you as a board approve every year. So depending on what those are in a given year, if a project meets one of those other criteria, it could qualify for additional tax increment. For a non-housing project, you could qualify for additional percentage of tax increment if you meet additional qualifying benchmarks. No matter how many of those you meet, your total tax increment as a developer would be maxed out at 90%. Next slide, please. As far as the term for the reimbursement, that is driven a little bit by what the definitions are in state statute. HDRZs, if it's centered around a light rail or bus rapid transit, the max term is 15 years. If it's centered around commuter rail, then it's 25 years. And then for us, obviously, as we negotiate the reimbursement amount and the cap, that will be based on the demonstrated gap, what those public benefits are that are incorporated, and then ultimately what are the eligible costs for the project associated with those that gap. Next slide, please. So our next steps for you as a board, again, today's presentation is just informational, but we will return with the final draft of this policy for consideration and adoption. Also, you acting as both the City Council and the RDA board will likely be asked to consider approval of an interlocal agreement, which essentially just sets up the distribution of the tax increment from the city to the RDA as part of establishing these project areas. And then we will also return with additional updated information on our CRA TI policy as we continue to work through some of those items. I believe that's the last slide. But I wanted to highlight some of the comments that we had heard from you as a board. In our last conversation, Director Dugan asked that we make sure that family-sized units and our annual housing priorities are in consideration. I think you saw that we put those as an additional benchmark that they could qualify for additional reimbursement rate. Director Valda Morris asked about ground floor commercial space and how we can help more, so we put that in as a threshold requiring as part of that. And then you also see that coming back to you as part of our commercial assistance programs. Director Petro, you asked how we would utilize the livability benchmarks. I think we indicated that 2 of those would be required as a threshold, and then if you met more of those, you could qualify for additional increment. And then your focus priorities around ownership, affordable commercial space, adaptive reuse, and public art, each of those were included in that list of qualified livability benchmarks. So those are the comments we received last time and how we've incorporated them in the policy moving forward. This time, Mr. Chair, we'd be open to any further discussion and input, and otherwise we'll take this and return in the future with a finalized version and consideration for adoption.
Board members? Board member Petra?
My only concern continues to be that by design, HTRZs are not super stellar for addressing historical inadequacies, but but it doesn't mean I don't want to push ourselves. I still think 1950 West North Temple should be an HTRZ. I know it's outside the very in vogue place to be developing, but I suspect it'll become in demand, and I'd like us to avoid gentrification and to create a well-balanced community out there when that demand comes. So anything we can do to make sure that we are pivoting and using this tool in being preemptive, in not exacerbating historical inequities, with 1950 West North Temple being my preeminent example of where we could do that. That's just my caveat.
Thank you. I think we remember Morris.
Danny, on the housing, so I saw that one of the thresholds is family size housing residential, which we had talked about, and then it just says housing, other housing thresholds. And I was wondering if we can be even more explicit about affordable home ownership opportunities or projects that would come our way, that we would like to come our way. At the HTRC, I'm not sure if the board members are in agreement. How do you say that? In agreement. But I feel strongly that we need to keep pushing for this family size, which we have, and we have some units already built, but we also need to keep pushing and telling the world out there that it's looking at HTRC and our participation or our collaboration, that we're really serious about home ownership, affordable home ownership. Please do your math, developers out there, hard. We really want to, collaborate, and that it's really important that we start providing those opportunities for those people that cannot get into the market without the assistance of the municipality in this case. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're moving on now on item number 5. With item number 4, it got pulled from the agenda. So item number 5, informational item, RDA exploration trip update. Danny, RDA director.
I'd be happy to take this. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were asked by you as a board to just provide a quick recap on our RDA exploration of Pittsburgh. I want to first start by saying thank you to everyone participating in that, both obviously you as a board and staff and everyone who joined. Mr. Chair, if it's all right, I wanted to start with just repeating what our goals and purpose were in taking on this trip, and then try to go through some of what the highlights and takeaways are. And then if there's something that we have missed in that, we'd be more than happy to receive any additional input from the board on what additional focus or emphasis we'd like to put on some of those takeaways. So, as you know, in terms of participating, our goal was to learn how other cities look at redevelopment, how they coordinate their funding sources, identify their priorities, address issues, and overall just utilize RDAs as a tool. Our purpose in doing so is to take away specific lessons, best practices, and ideas that we could come back and implement immediately into what we're bringing to you as a board for both projects and policy and high-level issues. Biggest of those being our housing activities, commercial development, infrastructure, public art, and property disposition. So we ultimately landed on choosing Pittsburgh as a city we wanted to research and explore. One, because the combination of projects and programs that they are working on are very similar to what we're doing. Their priorities are very much based in both housing, commercial, specifically small businesses, and helping build those programs. And they do a broad range of housing as well in their property development, and also manage tax abatement programs. So going through our takeaways, trying to categorize those for kind of putting some structure on what those were. The first one, in terms of priorities, what we heard both from our colleagues in Pittsburgh and also as part of our follow-up conversations is the need to amplify priorities and focus on minority and women-owned business enterprises, and also overall just raise the bar for developers and what we're expecting of them as part of receiving incentives and investment participation from the agency. recognizing that I think there is a general consensus that we all see that Salt Lake City is much different than it was 10 and specifically 20 years ago. And in doing so, we need to be able to recognize that the market conditions really impact what we're able to do. And our policies need to be able to address the conditions within the community and provide for the flexibility and being nimble so that we can address those as the market is changing and not always lagging behind that. Second takeaway from communication standpoint, increasing the marketing and opportunities and programs, especially again to the minority and women-owned businesses. This was a main focus that we heard coming from Pittsburgh. This is what they really strive to address, and we took that to heart. Also reflecting on who we are and who we want to be as a city, and make sure that we're making decisions and targeting funding that we're doing it in a way that represents us. To not be afraid of acknowledging what our historical influences and practices have not necessarily been good for BIPOC communities in their areas of the city. Reach out and increase our public surveys and engagement, specifically as it relates to trying to incorporate the community's goals and priorities into our housing efforts and priorities. Hopefully you picked up on the fact that there is a significant amount of data and communication of not just what our investment and the units and the funding that we're utilizing, but how that is being leveraged across the city and other sources. From an aspect of growth, recognize that that is a positive for Salt Lake City, but that we still need to be intentional with our opportunities, and we need to be conscious of how to bring justice throughout our funding, zoning, and engagement with the community, and then also be more strategic in how we put our resources, specifically how we consider the use of natural resources and what those constraints are in development moving forward. From an operations standpoint, we saw how efficient Pittsburgh is within their URA organization and how they operate, and overall how we can apply this to utilize RDA as a better tool here in Salt Lake City, how to use it to reinforce our identity and character and not let that be dictated to us from developers or outside sources. There is a significant amount of discussion of bringing you as a board into the process earlier within development and providing a better overall picture as part of our presentations of what some of the background is regarding the information and requests put in front of you. And then obviously we had a healthy discussion from us and our staff of just our overall workload and making sure that we're collectively trying to do a better job of playing offense and not necessarily just reacting to development and issues coming to us. I see Jen smiling, so I know she appreciates that. From a financing aspect, Pittsburgh had a great staff that was dedicated towards financing, and I think we recognize that we can increase our efforts to considering other options for financing, whether that's at a federal or state level. They were extremely aggressive in how they created affiliates, even to pursue specific funding sources. And so I think that was a takeaway for us of what we could be doing differently or better there. And also with the tools that we have, specifically just HDRZs and project areas that we just talked about, do we shift a little bit and create smaller project areas for specific developments and look at ways that we can be really diligent in what we get from those? Commercial activity is probably one of the main aspects that we learned as part of looking at Pittsburgh. Number one, how do we become more involved in commercial development and responsive to opportunities? You obviously see this as we bring our commercial assistance programs to you for approval and how we want to structure those. But we definitely recognize their heavy focus on small, local, minority, and women-owned businesses. And I think that's absolutely something we want to take into account as we craft our programs moving forward. They were also very creative in what some of their considerations were for collateral, recognizing that in doing some of the smaller loans and some of the projects they were participating in, that they had to get more creative and take on a little bit more risk. So we'll be presenting that to you as a board as well. They were efficient in their commercial lending. They utilized a one-stop shop, similar to what we've done from our housing loan development program. They've done that on the commercial side, so that people can come, and it removes the barriers for people to apply and puts the burden a lot more on the staff on the back end of how to put them in touch with what the right resource is in the program, not just within the RDA, but also utilize that citywide. We definitely saw the need for more technical support and assistance for businesses applying, specifically how we can help childcare industry and businesses receive financing and improve and increase the amount of those opportunities and businesses we have. And then how we can increase feedback from the community and organizations on what they feel is needed within our programs and how we roll those out into their communities and neighborhoods. Obviously, a lot of focus on housing activity. We saw a need for maybe looking at additional programs. There was some significant work that they're doing on senior housing. They also have a very aggressive home ownership grant that, if you recall, was split between a grant and a sleeping second mortgage that provided up to $90,000 for people to get into home ownership. And then looking at how we can provide funding for anti-displacement programs as part of our efforts in project areas. Next was we saw significant investment in public spaces, plazas, and trails. They also had some creative ways to help fund the maintenance of those. Obviously, some of those were just taken up by neighborhood groups after they were built, and the funding to maintain them came from that. And then also what the importance of place for nonprofits and community partners were when we went off-site and saw some of those users. That's something we definitely have recognized that we can do a better job on. Acquisition and disposition, they certainly had a much different process and were a little bit different approach in what they did for targeting acquisition. A lot of their properties came from tax foreclosures or even conservatorships. They were not necessarily as active at going out and looking at opportunities, but those were coming to them. And they shared a different philosophy in disposition. They're still very much favoring sale versus what we're looking at as transitioning towards long-term ground leases. But takeaways from that is trying to incorporate more community involvement and increase the public benefits within our property disposition and make sure that our restrictions are in place that we can enforce that. That's a complete list. As I said, next steps. Obviously, you just saw our tax increment policies. Those are coming to you, so we've already started trying to incorporate some of these broad level goals and priorities within what we're proposing in those policies. Moving forward with HTRZs and project areas, how we can be more diligent about where we look to target those, and also what's that allocation of TIF within those project areas. You see that in our current applications of having a much heavier shift towards infrastructure and public space and sharing less potentially with private development. Commercial assistance programs, as I said, will start coming to you, and you'll see us incorporating that focus on smaller businesses. The annual housing priorities is something that you as a board and us as staff can start talking about where we want to target those funding and or maybe look at doing additional programs. And then ongoing for us, we'll be continuing to look at efficiencies in operation. You'll start seeing us come to you with the results of our data plan and how we're incorporating that. We will be joining other cities in terms of a quarterly meeting on best practices for data. And then have no doubt we'll come back to you with staff levels and issues with that in terms of how we look to structure that, as well as potential for being more creative of seeking funding sources and types. That's as quick as I could make all of that information, and so please let me know either now or at any time you can share more thoughts and ideas of what we might have missed or what you'd like us to focus on.
Danny, thank you. I mean, I wanted to start by thanking, your staff and, for organizing this trip. I know that was a lot of work. Amanda here, and I forget about the other names. You might remember Catherine. I mean, everybody for working so hard to make this useful and incredible. I learned a lot of, from the URA, from their mistakes as well. And it's incredible to see an organization like this to recognize their mistakes and try to do good on them. I would like to get more information from them about a piece when we were at the Penguin Stadium and they were talking about the Lower Hill and how they are trying to lift up this community that the URA affected with their projects or failed projects, and how they're, for example, while developing these projects, they're incorporating people from that community. So they're trying to hire from that community first, and if they don't have anybody there, they try to get someone that might not have the certifications to get the certifications so trying to get them there. So I was very impressed with that approach. It's a more holistic approach. It's not only redevelopment land, but they're also focused on people, and that was just eye-opening to me. And I appreciate you guys exposing us to this. It really meant a lot to me. So anybody else? Board Member Mano.
I'll just also say thank you for the trip. I learned a lot. I think what stood out for me that the Pittsburgh and the URA are doing that maybe we can learn from is how connected their development projects are with their economic development programs in terms of commercial loan assistance and finding space for small business, women and minority-owned businesses. And that's something that I'm hopeful that as a city we can do a little bit of a better job of marrying those. When we say as a city council, yes, you can have this rezone, but we really want ground floor commercial space. How do we not just say that and then it's ground floor commercial space that never gets leased, but we say that and we figure out how we can support finding a suitable tenant and providing them financial assistance to start their businesses within our city and in those projects where we're asking for that space that helps activate our streets and our community. The thing that I learned that I'm not sure I do want to repeat is that it feels like they're really disconnected, or they're kind of, it seemed like from the typical Pittsburgh city resident that they're a bit of a sort of black box and no one quite, they're not quite as accessible as you all are to us as the council and to the community. So I appreciate how close we work with the RDA, and it seems like the city of Pittsburgh maybe doesn't work quite as closely with the URA as we do with you. And so that's one thing that I think we're perhaps doing a much better job than what I saw there. So a lot of great things, but also things that I feel like we're doing a really great job, and we should commend ourselves for the openness and transparency that we have with our residents.
Board Member Valdemoros and then Dugan.
I feel like, all of what you guys have said, I think we have a great opportunity, Danny and staff. There's no lack of us finding small businesses, BIPOC businesses that can use the help. So I think it's a matter of us putting our hats and thinking, how are we going to get that done if we're really interested in, and focusing on BIPOC small businesses out there that we have helped in the past, but we need to be more focused on. I mean, thankfully we have a few incubators in the 9-line project area that can definitely, use the people incubating there can definitely use the city intervention. They're ready to do that. And it was a city project, some of them. And so I feel like we've already created the platform to incubation. Now we need to go to the next level. And this is the opportunity for the RDA to, to fully take advantage of that opportunity. So I'm excited about all the things that happen in Pittsburgh and the things that we learned, and you thinking about it and adjusting things here and there in the RDA, and you have great staff to get it done. So I'm encouraged. So thank you.
We're doing.
Yeah, and again, thank you very much for the opportunity to join your staff going to Pittsburgh. Our board member Manos and Valdemoros' points are spot on across the board, what we found out from there. But I also just appreciated the opportunity for the staff to hear our thoughts and our visions and our discussions, one-on-one, while we're walking the streets, while we're visiting places, while we're going for runs in the morning. So it was a nice opportunity to have those connections so that we now can understand each other better. But I really, a lot of lessons learned. You pointed them all out there, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work together on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Petro.
All the technical things I agree with. I also really appreciated the culture there that was introspective. And I wholeheartedly admit that we exist in a political climate here in Salt Lake City that is waiting for us to trip and not perform so that we can have stones cast at us. And I get that. But I love how introspective they were about the past things that didn't work, that they will not allow themselves to replicate. And I think we're on a trajectory to do that. I hope that maybe the political climate would calm down enough for us to even have those conversations in open session occasionally, but even doing them in small groups or in ways that help us. You're already amazing about letting me say things like HTRZs aren't good for inequities, but let's do it anyway. So I appreciate that you already allow for that kind of dialogue. But, we're so much younger than that redevelopment agency. And so us integrating a system of postmortem introspection and analysis to make sure we are optimizing, like the Station Center plan really did make me feel incredibly excited. The Perpetual Housing Fund is making me excited. We are leading on so many important things. I want to make sure that we do postmortems and stay introspective about what did and didn't work so that we can carry forward the good things and become even better every project that we take on.
Again, thank you to your team. Impressive trip. I say that about all the trips I participated, and I could say this very comfortable about this one. So thank you so much for all the work. I think this is it for this item. We are moving on to report and announcement, item number 6. Report and announcement from the executive director. Is there any reports and announcements from that table? It doesn't seem like it. Let's move on to report and announcements from the RDA staff. Danny?
Just a few quick updates. I know you're probably all getting tired of hearing me speak. I apologize.
No.
We'll mix it up a little bit next time, I promise. First item, just to update the board that we have released the request for information inviting architects, lenders, builders, and other professionals to express their interest in partnering on the ADU development assistance program. So that is on the street. It closes in just a few weeks in mid-September, and we'll keep you updated on what that progress is, but that has been out there. Number 2, you probably have heard a few of, in your other briefings, of the public input opportunities, but just want to cap them for your benefit as a board. First, the community visioning phasing of the Ballpark Next is out on the street, and that kicked off with the survey engagement opportunities. This is a continuation of the engagement process to receive input from the community, the residents, neighborhood businesses, organizations, stakeholders, and really just to take all that information and further refine what are those ballpark guiding principles that we will then use to kind of start building into what we want to see as far as development, RFP, next steps. Second item in terms of public input is the RDA and the Seven Canyons Trust are currently seeking input on the City Creek daylighting design concept along Folsom Trail. You may have heard that. Technical advisory committee meetings, 2 public design walks, roundtable meetings with the business owners, and also those have been held over the past 3 weeks, and also an online survey for the project, and this phase is open until this Friday. So if you want to provide input or reach out to anyone on that, please do so. It closes on September 15th. Once this design feedback is gathered, the consultants will finalize that concept. And then October 21st, there'll be a community celebration to kind of show what that final concept is. And then also to unveil a mural that was funded in part by the Arts Council, the RDA, and the Popular Grove Community Council. So that event's on October 21st. And until this Friday, please solicit any additional feedback or input on that. Unless there's any other questions, Mr. Chair, that's all we have.
Thank you so much. Oh, Board Member Mano.
Where can I find the ADU RFP so I can share it with people?
I will send that to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Will you send it to all of us?
All of us?
Yes,
Please, thank you.
absolutely.
And also the link for the City Creek input as well.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
We will shoot an email with all of that
Daylighting
information.
input, yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I report from the Vice Chair. There is no report from the Chair either. Item number D, we don't have any written briefings or consent today, but we do have a closed session. We have 2 items of business to discuss in closed session, both regarding real property disposition and attorney-client matters. And one of the items is with both our RDA and our council hats on, and I'm looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we go into closed session for the purpose of receiving advice of counsel and discussing acquisition of property.
Second.
Disposition of property.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Wharton and a second by Board Member Dugan. I'm going to call the question. Board Member Mano?
Yes.
Board Member Valdemoros? Board Member Dugan?
Yes.
Board Member Wharton?
Yes.
Board Member Young?
Yes.
Board Member Petro?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. This motion passes unanimously. We're going to go into closed session. Yes, we need a few minutes to clear
An
the
RDA meeting is adjourned after closed session, right?
Yes. Yes, and whenever we're done. Thank you.